Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and to this special explainer. We've spent the last month covering absolutely every angle of the tournament, but now the confetti is finally settled, the stadiums are completely quiet, and Spain are officially your 2026 World Cup champions. It was a brilliant tournament, for sure. But as we pivot to some evergreen content for the channel, our focus is shifting away from the match highlights and straight into the hidden machinery of the sport. We're going to explore the massive, sweeping changes coming to global football over the next decade. Riding the high of Spain's incredible victory, it's so easy to just look forward to the next kickoff, right? But what exactly happens behind the scenes of the beautiful game to make these massive tournaments a reality? The entire landscape of international football is shifting right beneath our feet, and it's being driven by decisions made in boardrooms far, far away from the pitch. So let's dive right into this. FIFA President Gianni Infantino recently floated the idea of expanding the tournament even further, to a staggering 64 teams. He frames this as a way to give smaller countries a fighting chance, to unite the world through soccer. But it really forces us to ask a critical question. Is this endless push for expansion actually driven by altruism and the good of the game, or is it a carefully calculated economic strategy? To answer that, we've dug into the latest research to bring you the definitive guide on what comes next. We'll be looking at the top 5 stories shaping football's future: record-breaking revenue, the 64-team mirage, the climate change crisis, the human cost, and the burden on fans. All right, story 1, the $15 billion cycle. $15 billion. Just let that jaw-dropping revenue figure sink in for a second. That's the projection for FIFA's 2023 to 2026 commercial cycle. Now, originally, FIFA only projected around $11 billion, but thanks to the expansion to 48 teams and those heavily priced secondary markets, that number has just completely skyrocketed. And if you think that's high, looking ahead to the 2027 to 2030 cycle, FIFA is suspecting to make even more, with some projections pushing toward an astonishing $20 billion. The World Cup isn't just a tournament anymore. It's the main financial engine that sustains FIFA's entire business model. To really put this into perspective, let's break down the projected $9 billion generated from the year 2026 alone. We've got $3.9 billion coming from broadcasting rights, over $3 billion from tickets and corporate hospitality, and roughly $2.1 billion from marketing and other licensing. It's pretty simple math. More matches mean more advertising space, more corporate suites, and more content for digital platforms. It is an absolutely booming business, but we have to ask how this financial explosion balances against the actual integrity of the sport itself. Which brings us to story 2, a 64-team World Cup. Expanding the tournament fundamentally changes the mathematical and logistical reality of the competition. If a 64-team World Cup maintained the traditional 4-team group structure, we would be looking at 128 total matches. Think about that. That is literally double the amount of games played in the old 32-team formats we all grew up with. And trying to accommodate 128 matches is a pure logistical nightmare. It heavily strains a host country's infrastructure, meaning they need more stadiums, more hotels, and massive transport networks over a much longer period. But beyond the logistics, there's a huge structural shift. By making qualification easier for the biggest nations, a 64-team format severely devalues regional qualifiers. If broadcasters stop caring about those qualifying campaigns, regional confederations become totally financially dependent on FIFA. This is exactly why European governing body UEFA and the Asian Football Confederation are strongly opposing it. They've neutrally pointed out some very severe risks to the international football calendar. Moving on to story 3, the climate change crisis. Now, the 2026 tournament in North America managed to survive the punishing heat, but they did it by relying heavily on multiple time zones and specifically utilizing 4 closed, roofed, air-conditioned stadiums in cities like Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, and Vancouver. But going forward, this is a massive problem. Climate change is seriously increasing the burden of hosting daytime matches. With rising temperatures, particularly in open-air venues in Southern Europe, where the 2030 tournament is heavily based, we have to seriously ask, will a traditional Summer World Cup even be possible or safe without completely reshaping the global football calendar? The crucial takeaway here is the alarming gap between science and policy. FIFA uses a metric called the wet bulb globe temperature to measure heat stress. Now, the Players' Union, FIFPro, recommends postponing play when this metric hits 28 degrees Celsius. But FIFA, they don't actually mandate cooling breaks until it hits 32 degrees Celsius. During the 2026 tournament, nearly 20% of matches were played in conditions that FIFPro considers dangerously hot. And experts warn that just relying on stadium air conditioning isn't a sustainable fix either, mostly because it actively increases emissions and the urban heat island effect. And that leads us to story 4, the cost to players. 76 matches. Just take a moment to process that number. Research highlighted that one Argentina player endured exactly 76 matches over the course of the single season leading into the World Cup. The level of player fatigue we're seeing right now is entirely unprecedented in the history of the sport. It's wild because these billions in revenue directly correlate to the physical exhaustion of the players out there on the pitch. The 2026 World Cup followed the toughest domestic seasons on record. In fact, the France squad reportedly entered the tournament carrying the highest overall fatigue levels of any national team. When you add more matches through a 48-team, let alone a 64-team expansion, and then force them to play those matches under severe heat risks, it pushes the human body to its absolute breaking point. Finally, story 5, the cost to fans. Let's look at a seemingly quirky but honestly incredibly telling example from the research: the official World Cup sticker album. Because of the 48-team expansion, the traditional sticker album ballooned to a massive 980 items. Researchers point out that this actually creates a costly collective action dilemma for ordinary supporters who are just trying to complete it. It's a perfect micro example of a much bigger macro problem. Because at the end of the day, that $15 billion in revenue ultimately comes right out of the fans' pockets. A larger, longer tournament places a significant financial burden on traveling supporters. We're talking inflated secondary ticketing markets, extended hotel stays, and massive cross-country travel costs, which, incidentally, happens to be the main source of the tournament's carbon emissions. There is a very real risk that by expanding the tournament to 64 teams just to chase revenue, the World Cup loses the exclusivity and magic that has underpinned its appeal for almost a century. So we arrive at the ultimate question for the future of football. Is this endless push for more teams, more matches, and more inventory truly about giving smaller nations a chance and growing the game? Or is it simply about maximizing FIFA's bottom line, completely regardless of the cost of player welfare, the climate, and the fans? I really want to know what you think about this. Let's debate it in the comments. Does this expansion actually benefit football or just the balance sheet? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the beautiful game.